who's in control of Iran? In theory, the supreme leader is leading, right? He's the leader. He gets the final say. But in reality, the military power is disaggregated. And so it's super not clear right now who's in control of Iran.
Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
Jill asks, was Joe drugged? I spelled drugged with a J in the show notes intentionally. It's like Kris Kringle convicted, courthouse calamity in Miracle on 34th Street. Okay, so a little bit of background here, and I'm going to be a little bit of the more sensationalist podcaster than I typically stoop to in this. Here's the story. Jill Biden said, maybe Joe Biden was drugged. I should have asked for a blood test. The media immediately pointed to the fact that Jill Biden had, right after the debate, said that Joe had done a great job. So what did she really think? And I wrote, that's politician talk. Jill is not a politician in exactly. She probably put it in too blunt of a way. But it's like, was that a good debate performance? Did you like that movie? Do you like pineapple on your pizza? It's just one of those things. I thought that it was stupid of the media to be like, but she said otherwise at the time. But then she does wonder aloud whether he's been drugged. Without engaging in unfounded speculation, what would it mean if Joe Biden had been drugged? He's old, but age strikes different people differently, and it was like a very low point of all of his performance. And it's not totally out of the question, is it? So, what do you think? Was he likely drugged?
So if he was, it would have been a profound ethical and moral failing for everyone involved that knew of it and did it, right? Because they would be admitting to knowing that he wasn't in possession of his faculties and able to do the job of president. And frankly, the job of president is a very important, difficult job with heavy responsibilities. And every single person involved, if that is the case, I'm not saying it's the case. This is one of those wild things where there's no, like, my skeptical mind says there's no possible way this was happening right before a presidential debate. But if it happened, it would be probably the biggest scandal in U.S. history, or one of them, right?
Yeah.
Because he was the active president of the United States, and it would be a serious problem, right? Because remember, when George Bush went under anesthesia for surgery, someone else assumed the acting powers of the presidency, right?
Yeah, Alexander Haig. No, Cheney.
I don't know, but somebody else. In this case, it would then be, if this really happened, it would then be actively knowing that Biden was not in possession fully of his faculties if he needed to be medicated to such a degree to even operate. So it's a whole thing. Like I don't know. But I do agree on one thing. If she really suspected something like that, she should have asked for a blood test to help get him medical treatment, right? If he really wasn't in a position to make decisions for himself, she's the one who would have been able to intervene and help him out, right? Like, at least that's my understanding of how that works. But again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. Like, these are just my thoughts and my opinions on this situation. It would be a huge travesty, though, if it really was at that point that he was just so far gone that he needed to be medicated or drugged just to stand up on the national stage and talk, right? That would be really bad. That would be a huge failure on the part of one of our political parties for actually acting in a moral and ethical way. I don't think that's what happened. I think the most obvious answer is probably the answer of what happened is that he was old. He was very old. And that if he'd been preparing for the debates for a really long time, that maybe he was just really tired, right? That maybe he hadn't had enough sleep, or maybe he drank too much coffee or something. Like, it could be a much more simpler explanation than than an extreme like he was drugged. Maybe he was just really tired and he was old.
Yeah, The debate was at 9 Eastern, and I do remember immediately afterward thinking to myself, man, I'm like ready for bed at 8 sometimes. I wouldn't want to have a debate at 9. Gosh, whew. But I'm not the president.
Look at
So,
how many times Trump's taking naps now during press conferences and cabinet meetings, and they keep saying, "Oh, he's just resting his eyes." He's old. They're old people. They were old. Trump's old. Biden's old. Old people, they get tired. They get fatigued. They get
Right.
exhausted. Maybe he thought he could do it. He could push himself, and he was wrong, right? Maybe he thought he could make it, and time went out, and he got a little too sleepy, and his mind didn't quite focus, right? I knew
Yeah.
that Biden was probably going to drop out or that he lost when he said that they defeated Medicare. I was like, this is not good, Joe Biden.
we know about the Attorney General to Governor pipeline. We know about the Governor to President pipeline. But maybe there's the politics to a nursing home pipeline now. Politics to immediate retirement afterward pipeline.
This is the biggest argument, frankly, for things like term limits or like a mandatory retirement age. Because how many stories now have we seen of like politicians literally not leaving and just staying to the very, very end? Feinstein, well into her old age, having to be wheeled around in a wheelchair and like falling asleep and just not giving it up. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is not wanting to leave, even when she
Yeah.
had cancer. What was the other? That one congressperson from Texas who just ended up in I think it was a memory home, right?
Then Maxine Waters is running for re-election too.
Yeah, but I understand what it is, right? That it's very difficult to reach the level of power that they are at, and that it is the end of the line, right? That is the furthest they're going to make it in their political careers, most likely, and they don't want to give it up, right? They cling to power. They like the perks. They like the prestige, the respect. They like being able to make a difference. And politics is one of those things where usually once you're out, right? Once you stop
Yeah.
running on that particular hamster wheel, right? No more hamster wheel, right?
That's
People don't usually, there are exceptions. So Trump is the exception right now of somebody who left office and then successfully ran for a non-consecutive term. There's
Yeah.
only two, right? There's him and there's, I think it was Cleveland.
It was Cleveland. Yeah, the namesake of Cleveland, Ohio. No, just kidding. Hey, it just occurred to me because there's that Senator Ben Sasse guy who's dying of cancer, and he's in his mid-50s or something like that. And since he's close to the end, and since he's in an experimental treatment whereby he's got time that others would not have had, he's saying some pretty interesting things. And I look at him, and just now I thought to myself, that is probably what elder statesmen looked like when that term was coined. When it was seen, it was like, okay, this guy knows he's close to the end, and so he's going to tell you the truth. But these days, it's an extended old age that we have. So maybe elder statesman or woman isn't something we should seek after in these days when we have lifespan, but not necessarily health span to match it. And that's not a plug for Longevity Medical Center. I don't go there. But the parallels there, I had to interject. Sorry.
No, I understand what you're saying. The point I'm trying to make is that time is flying by these elderly individuals in government, such that in the moment when we need to adapt or change to technologies, for instance, things like AI or things like flying cars, or there's just a whole list of issues, the internet, right, and safety and security on the internet in terms of the types of regulations we need. In a whole assortment of issues, the whole situation is passing right by them. If you listen in the hearings of the questions they ask, of some of the stuff they talk about, there's just a fundamental misunderstanding in cases of what exactly these technologies are or do and the dangers that we face. Look, there was a congressperson in Washington who tried to pass a mental competency test for members of Congress. Essentially, the argument was there needs to be a test to make sure that nobody who's serving in Congress has dementia. That did not pass. That legislation did not get out of committee, right? Like it did not get to the floor. There was no vote on it. So clearly, the people in Congress understand that there is a liability here of older members of Congress who may be in the age range of having some kind of issues with their full mental faculties, that they don't want that kind of accountability. And that's what happens when you're your own boss, right? So the only way a member of Congress gets kicked out is if they get impeached, if they get forcibly removed by the body, or if voters decide not to reelect them. That's it. So essentially they're their own bosses and their own auditors, right? They are self-regulating bodies. And so they decide what the standards are by which they can keep their job. The end. Yes, the voters decide, but what do the voters really know except what is publicly disclosed, right? There's a role that journalism plays in all this of figuring out what the real truth of the issue is, right? Because it's a huge security risk. If the people who are in charge of spending the money don't actually understand what's going on, then problems that we may be facing that are immediate, that are right in front of us, that really need money to be spent to deal with them, things like natural disasters or wars or whatever you want to talk about. If the people who are supposed to be making those decisions don't actually understand the decisions they're making, we're in trouble, right? That's why you need to have an informed electorate that's actively paying attention to what's going on and notices these kinds of things. But we don't. Clearly, there's people who are escaping scrutiny at the highest levels of government. And it's a difficult issue. There's no simple answer to this because the risks are immense and the ways to address this are also very immense. So there's a person I was reading is advocating we need thousands of members of Congress, not the numbers we have now. We need a huge number. We need 5,000 members of Congress or something.
I think George Washington would have been in favor of that, given that he said something like we need 30,000 people to a district or something like that. Do you think because the media said, NBC said, and there's currently a reckoning within the Democratic Party, and I thought to myself, what's the reckoning really? Is it just Trump's president? What reckoning? I don't know.
Oh, I know exactly what they're mentioning. There was a report on why the Democratic Party failed to elect Kamala Harris president, and the report was riddled with all sorts of problems. One of them was that they had no conclusions listed, and that there was no mention of Israel or Gaza or Biden's age. There's a whole list of things that were just completely missing out of that report of what went wrong and how do we fix it. And the question becomes, why? Can we really not hire somebody to answer basic questions about what went wrong? It seems like there's a massive blind spot right now in the Democratic Party of actually figuring out how to win elections. It's this machine that churns out money and takes the money in and sends the money out to consultants. But the consultants don't seem to be actually like finding a winning message or way to win in national elections.
My thing with that, and you've heard me take this tact before in arguments, is that it isn't that it's not the party's job, it's the candidate's job. Because the candidates are the ones running. But in terms of the presidency, that won't do.
There is one other divide that I know of. It's that there's an effort being done talking about the age issue of somebody is trying to fund primaries for younger candidates as opposed to older candidates. But the other big divide I know of is the divide between the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, so Bernie Sanders and AOC, and the mainstream wing of the Democrat. So you're seeing that in California between Steyer and Becerra. Becerra is a mainstream Democrat, Steyer is more the progressive Democrat, and it's a whole issue of money in politics and having a vision for the kind of future we want to have. Do we want to have big solutions to problems like universal health care, or do we want to fiddle around the edges and have something like Obamacare but a little bit better, or something like Social Security but a little bit better? Those are the things.
And that's a debate to be had, to be sure, but I think that you see an answer to that. I don't know if it's an answer, but it's a supersession of that debate In the California gubernatorial thing, it's like when there's not enough houses, they all know you need more homes. If there was a crisis where there wasn't oil coming in from Iraq to California, they know you got to get the oil in a pinch. Not all of them, not Steyer, not Porter, but there was a big agreement generally on that. So there are disagreements, but there's also a lot of agreements. And the media portrays it as like we're at loggerheads on all things. No, not on all things. Certainly not on all things. So there is the tension, you're right, and let it be a tension. But it should be. But the tension has somehow been blown up that I think because media, and social media too, thrive on controversy so much, but the controversy doesn't get in the way of me getting out of this house, getting in my car, going to work every day. People still do their jobs. Last word on this, on the Biden thing.
I wish that he had simply kept his word on being a one-term transitional president, right? He said from the outset, it's part of why voters voted for him. I'll do one term. I'll set up the next candidate, one and done.
I'm a transition candidate.
I'm a transition candidate. That was the argument. It's part of the reason I voted for him, is that he said unambiguously, I thought, that he was going to do one term, and he was going to help prepare the Democratic Party to pass the torch to someone else. Ultimately, that's what happened, but the way they went about it was really, it was ineffective.
Ham-fisted.
So I understand why, look, I get why he did, we talked about this, and this is my cynical mind, why he did it in the way he did it, that he waited until after the primary window to just hand the nomination over to Kamala Harris. That was smart strategically, right, to ensure that Kamala Harris would have the nomination. But the gambit there, the gamble, was that she'd be able to win with such a limited window of time. And that's where I think there was a real failure, right? If it had been from the start that we knew that he wanted Kamala Harris to be the candidate from the start of his term, then there would have been a whole different process involved, right? Because it would have given the Democratic Party time to line up the assets, line up the different stakeholders, and get everybody on board. There wasn't enough time.
Then there must be a primary. So as of Thursday, May 28th, there's a deal. It's 3 days old, and as in the delegation reached the deal on Monday the 25th. But it's just that whoever's in charge of Iran and Trump hadn't signed it yet. First of all, who's in charge of Iran? And did you hear that they wanted Mahmoud Ahmadinejad to take over? We remember him.
Yeah, so I did see that story about Ahmadinejad. That would be a terrible idea to have him take over. In terms of who's in control of Iran, again, this is one of those thorny issues. In theory, the person that they put in charge of Iran, the supreme leader, is leading, right? He's the leader. He gets the final say. But in reality, it seems to be much more complicated because we've talked about how the military power is disaggregated in the IRGC and the Revolutionary Guard, where it's severable, right? That they have stores of weapons in a whole bunch of different regions in the country, and that when the previous supreme leader died, he apparently left letters to all the little regional commanders. Here's what you need to do, right? Here's how you're going to react in the case of my death. And so it's super not clear right now on the ground who's actually in control of each area of Iran. That's why you saw, do you remember when, where I'm thinking this became an issue was when they had the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, and then there was a window of time where they said, oh, actually ships can go through, and then they didn't, right? That someone fired something, like they shot at a ship or fired missiles or something. I think it was do you remember the Indian ship where they were sending, I think it was that one, where somebody apparently said, yeah, go on through. And so the ship's like, okay, I guess I'll try. And then they got fired upon, you remember? And so that's where the big lingering question right now is, even if they hammer out a deal today, right now, it's not super clear that the deal would actually be enforced across the entire country. It's not unambiguous right now that there is total control over all of sovereign Iranian territory. And if there isn't, if there's little pockets of resistance or little groups that have boats or missiles or whatever, guns, that could still shut down the Strait of Hormuz just through the use of fear or threats, right? Then there is a problem still, right? Because even if they make a deal, if the deal is not actually upheld, we're still at an impasse, right? So Iran would still have to take actual control over its country.
So Iran is in a fractured state in that sense. So in that regard, we suspect very much that it's not over, even if the deal is signed and agreed to by Trump and by certain parties. And another aspect of it is, I don't think that, okay, this is me personally, I don't think that Trump is done with them. But I think that it would be the preference that oil prices fall prior to the midterms, and that after the midterms, we might expect a re-hardening of the stance. So, what do you think of that assessment?
I don't think you're wrong that Trump would prefer that gas prices go down, but we've discussed this. The gas prices are baked into the cake for at least the next month or 2 months because even if the Strait were open today, right now, and they went to pre-Iran war levels in terms of movement, that doesn't guarantee that the prices would go down for at least as long as it takes for the oil to get from where it is to where it needs to be. And part of the issue is that some of those operations were actually disrupted because do you remember the gas fields that were attacked that were owned by, I think it was Qatar? It's not like they can suddenly flip a switch and turn those back on. Some of these production facilities were also hit. And so we're not going to go all of a sudden back to pre-Iran war levels of production and shipping. Some of this is going to take time, a lot of time. And I think it's very optimistic thinking if that's really the motivation of the Trump administration, because I know he says it a bunch. He's like, prices are going to drop like a rock. They're going to go way down. It's going to be so great, right? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's how any of this works, right? That there are serious issues with trusting that Iran will keep its word, even if a deal is hammered out, because it's not so clear that, like we mentioned, they have control over the whole country. But there's also the issue of tolls, right? That they want the money that they're getting from charging ships to go through. And it's really not clear. This is where it becomes a real problem for Iran and the US is it's really not clear, at least to me as a lay observer, if for some of those tolls there's a criminal element to it. If some of the money is being diverted by the people charging those tolls to line their own pockets. Because if there's a organized crime element to it, like if it's a mafia kind of thing or the mob, that's a more intractable issue. It's really tough to get people to stop getting money from something unless they're offered like a better alternative. And that's tricky. Right. I'm not so sure. That's where it's going to be really difficult because if Iran actually doesn't have full control over all the elements within Iran, if they don't issue a command. So here's a scenario. If they issue a command that says stop, and then some of those groups decide Iran's a real mess right now, maybe we want to break away from the country proper because Iran's got 93 million people, right? It's not unheard of. Look at what happened with Russia and all the USSR. It's not unheard of for these sort of like pseudo states to form where essentially what they do is they figured out a way to make a continuous revenue source and they know how to do it on the cheap, right? You get a little boat, you fire a few shots at a ship, the ship stops going, right? They figured out how to do it with very limited resources. So that's my concern looking at this is what happens if people decide to turn to piracy? Iran's economy is in the gutter. People are starving. They're desperate. This goes back to what I've said before. Desperate people do desperate things. The highest point of leverage for these people is right now, right? As they're trying to hammer out this deal. How do you get lots and lots of money? Is you essentially go to the US or Iran and say, pay me to stop, pretty much. So that's one of those questions that's a bit of a wild card in this whole thing is that there could be some other group that views this as an opportunity right now to get away with making a lot of money.
I have wondered how Iran expects it's going to trade with the world. I don't know if the U.S. Navy is going to protect its vessels frankly. I don't, because Trump's been doing things. Maybe we'll do this, maybe we won't. Yeah, we've done it for 50 years, but we're not going to do it now. Oh, I never said I would protect the. And then it's some third party. Unfortunately, we've talked about a boom time for lawyers. It may be a boom time for pirates. I hate to say it.
Look at the part of the issue is the part of the world it's in, right? If you look at global piracy, there's only
Near Somalia and Yemen, yeah.
exactly there's only a handful of places where piracy happens to such a degree that it's a real problem.
Yeah.
It's right there, right? It's not that far away. And so that's one of those things I'm thinking about when I look at this thing is all of a sudden, if the shipping were to resume at volume, there's going to be a very valuable commodity at play, right? Because when the oil prices go way up and the gas prices go way up, all of a sudden the calculus changes a little bit for these pirates because yeah, they were going to get some money, but if they see if these companies ponying up money for the tolls or the payment to go through the Strait of Hormuz, why can't they also try to enact their own toll, right?
I know, yeah.
It's just a recipe
Bad
for it's bad news. You're right. It's a whole thing, and this is why I think the deal has to not have Iran get any money from the Strait
Indeed.
of Hormuz because otherwise it sends a really bad message to the whole world that if they too can try to exact some kind of toll off these narrow passageways. There's a handful, right? The Straits of Malacca, Cape of the one down at the bottom of the South America,
Yeah, Cape Horn or whatever.
that one, and Strait of Gibraltar. There's a handful of places where if this is allowed to go forward, it would be exorbitantly expensive for international trade and the economy. I don't think the countries of the world want that. Ultimately, they get to decide, right? They have the power.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the UK still got Gibraltar.
It's an intractable issue that they lie, right? That they've made agreements in the past and then just ignored those agreements, right? That some of the stuff, it's a big country, right? That they can hide stuff in places that we can't necessarily see all too well. And so they may agree to every demand, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that they've stopped what they were doing. They just agreed to stop what they were doing for those demands. And that's the big
Yeah.
issue here is that I don't know that this is going to close the door on future fighting or war because the problem may still persist.
Mondays with Mike.